Riverside.
Well, it's so good to invite Deb to the show. How you doing today, Deb?
Hello.
How you doing?
I like that music in the beginning. I mean, we could just keep it playing and talk right over it. It keeps me
We could. I
motivated.
could. I could. I could keep it low, slow and low.
I love music. I love music. So thank you, Keith. I'm very happy to be here on behalf of great conversation, and I look forward to your loyal listeners to hang in there with this episode as we dive in.
Me too. I like to ask my guests a question to kind of get us started. What's the best advice you've ever received?
What's the best advice I ever received? Yes. And that would be one of my very first professional um, jobs. A supervisor of mine, he used to walk around and always say, you have to take risk in order to get reward. So I always remember that. And to this day, I can still see his face saying it. Sometimes you have to take risk to get reward. Risk can be good, but risk can be bad. So you make sure you choose the right risk, right? To get the right
Exactly.
reward. Good Lord. But yeah, that was good advice. And that's because that's what started my career in helping people get money for auto loans. Sometimes you have to take risk on people that they're going to pay. That's called an underwriter. They look at the metrics and they'll say you got to take risks to get reward, and we all deserve second chances. That's for sure. So there you have
I,
it, my dear.
I love that. Sometimes third and fourth chances too.
There you go. Yeah. Right on. That's all right. God forgives us for our mistakes. And there's one thing we can always do is come back and try again.
Exactly. I love to ask my guests this question. It kind of gives you a chance to think about the people in your life who have served as inspiration for you and kind of give them kind of a shout out for their impact. So who were some people in your life who inspired you?
Who inspired me would be hands down my father. He passed away in 2018. And he inspired me because he was the oldest of 9 children. And they lived in Milwaukee. You're familiar with Milwaukee because you used to live there, right?
Right,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. He was the oldest of 9. And the stories he used to tell me, his mom and dad, they drank a lot of alcohol, and his father was an alcoholic. And being the oldest of 9, his dad used to um, actually beat up his mom, and my dad would really come after him to protect his mom and his siblings. So he would tell me stories, and later on in life, my troubles growing up and also first marriages that turned bad. My dad rescued me twice in my life. So you talk about a hero. Right there is the man. He told me he had been changing diapers since he was 16 years old, all the way until the day he passed, and he was 73. When you're the oldest of 9, you're going to see a lot of babies in your life and a lot of diapers.
Yeah,
So
being oldest, I
my
understand that.
yes, I love my dad. I miss him. He's my fishing buddy. We would go fishing all the time on the local lakes here in Wisconsin. I've got a bluegill, a smallmouth bass, and a crappie mounted in my lower level. We finished our basement, and thank God I had those mounted because they were all caught either in my dad's backyard or in his boat. So there's a lot of memories with those fish. And he made a good bluegill fish fry. He would fillet those little fish faster than I've ever seen, and we would mix up some egg and milk and half butter. I forgot what it was called, buttermilk, pancake mix and flour. And he would pull out that big turkey fryer, but he'd fill it up with oil, and we in his garage, and he would fry those bluegills. And let me tell you, Keith, the best. And I miss eating them because he was the one that supplied the fish. His freezer would be full of bags of fish because he lived to fish. And if I could have one more meal with my daddy, I would. I miss him so much. So thank you for letting me give a little spiel about my poppy.
No, that's always special.
Thank you.
I love your term calling yourself the champion of diversity and resilience. So tell us your personal story.
Yeah. Well, growing up, as I mentioned earlier, my parents were married when they were young. They were like 16 years old. They got married and expected their first child, which was my oldest sister. And then they had another one a year and a half later, my middle sister. And then I came along later in life, not too far later, but I came at a time that was obviously unexpected. They didn't plan for me. And at the same time, my mother, who was an adopted girl because her biological parents were into drugs. They were from the Chicago area, and when they realized they were expecting her, and they knew, this is going to be a problematic child because they were doing drugs while she was conceived and pregnant, her biological mom. They dropped her off, just like in the movies, in a basket on a step at a fire station. So the fire people put my mom into the system, and eventually she was adopted, and just had a rough life. And when I was conceived, her adopted dad, Keith, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. So he only had about a year or less to live, and at the same time, she was expecting me. By the time I was born, I think he passed away within 2 weeks of me being born. But the moral of the story here is she had to focus on taking care of her father, who was really sick, her adopted father. So my dad told me he would work full time and part time, and she just didn't want anything to do with me, and would leave me in the bassinet just crying. And I don't remember that. Obviously, I was a baby, but I do have a head in the back that's rather flat from laying in the crib and in the bassinet all the time. And there's truth to that, because you might have heard a lot of moms today who have babies, they keep them in the car seats because they're so busy on their phones. And a lot of these babies, their heads kind of are, they're soft when they're newborns, so they kind of just form with what they're constantly in. And I
Sure.
was constantly in a bassinet, so I've got this flat head on the back. I wear a lot of headbands and stuff, and so anyhow, that was the start of my life. And my mom was challenged later on in life with drinking and drugs. My father moved us out to the rural area to get us out of the city, and he was hoping that would help reduce any kind of crime or drugs raising the three girls. But you can't run away from a city, and you can't run away from drugs. It's everywhere, rural, city, West Coast to the East Coast, from the North to the South. It's just going to be everywhere. So she got involved with the wrong people in the new subdivision where we lived. Valium and pain meds were a drug of choice. They were stay at home moms raising the children, but doing things during the day they shouldn't have while we were at school. So eventually, um, my dad divorced her because she got into trouble with the wrong people. And I was the only one left at home at that time living with her, because my two older sisters, one was in the military and the other one just moved out. She was into drinking and drugs as well. And then my mom continued her bad habits in the home where we lived, which turned into a drug house with my middle sister and my mom partying every night. But I still would walk to school. I was in middle school at that time. And do the things that I had to do without any mom really around. And I couldn't tell my dad what was going on because she had rules in place with me as a 10-year-old that don't tell your dad this or otherwise this is going to happen. And you just listened. So eventually her habits turned into abandonment over a 2-year period. Um, she got so involved in the wrong people and drinking and drugs that she just disappeared. Once in a while, she would come back and leave me a note on my bedroom dresser with a little package of donuts saying she's just gone for some time, but she'll be back. And don't say anything to your father or anyone else. And I was so naive at the age 10, I just listened. But my grades were failing. Everybody knew, I believe, in that subdivision what was going on. But everyone, and again, everyone knew at school. But you know what? People see something and they don't say anything. That was evident. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, we're still stuck in this. If you see something, you're supposed to say something. I still think we don't say something. Would you agree?
No, we don't like to get involved in other people's lives. We don't like
Yeah.
to interfere. And honestly, I noticed that people are leery now because of the consequences. You know, if you
Yeah.
report the wrong person, you have to live in that neighborhood. So like,
Yeah.
I don't want the pushback on me or my family. So they just don't
Yeah.
get involved.
Yeah. Right. They don't get involved. But I have to say, I have to thank the neighbors in that subdivision. They knew what was going on. They didn't say anything to authorities for fear of any kind of retaliation or what have you. And we'll talk about this in regards to corporate America as well. But that's back then is when my people pleasing started to come into play because of that abandonment. Um, I learned in my neighborhood being alone in this 3-bedroom ranch home that was failing and looking horrific. The yard wasn't taken care of. The inside was just filthy. The refrigerator was moldy. And I learned how to people please in the neighborhood with neighbors who would invite me over for dinner and supper. Because you know what, Keith? They knew, but they never talked about it with me. They just would always have a plate at the table and come back and see us tomorrow, Deb. It would always
Wow.
be, yeah, yeah. And school knew too, because I remember I had to wait in the hot lunch line for people that didn't have enough money. I would get a certain colored ticket because the administration, the district would pay for my lunches because we were it was a divorce situation, so we came from a very poor family. Um, and they knew because my grades were starting to really fail. And I would cry easy because I had to hide it all. I had to hide everything. My mom had me hide everything. And that's kind of been the story of my life. It's like I put on this facade that everything is okay, but underneath it all, it's not. So that was my childhood experience. And eventually, my sister, that was in the military, the oldest one, she would come home every so often, and she noticed my mom was never there, and the home was deteriorating fast. And every time she'd look in the refrigerator, the same food was in there, but just with more mold growing. And I didn't know what to do. I was just a young girl. So she
Wow.
is the one. She is the one that you could say whistle blew to my dad that we need to do something. Something's not right here. And the police started to track the home a little bit more and noticed I was home alone. And I quickly was granted, my father was granted custody of me immediately. And then we went on an 18-month journey of a court custody battle in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And back then, Keith, judges more than I'd say 99% of the time would always give the mother the custody of the children. Do you remember that? I mean,
Oh
you
yeah,
might have heard that.
it's still happening
Yes.
today, I think. Yeah.
Yes, the judges always think the children are better served with their mom. And my dad hired an attorney, and my mom hired a really good attorney as well. And this case was a complete battle. And by the time I turned, oh gosh, 11 and a half, almost 12, the attorney representing my dad said the only way you're going to win custody of your daughter is if she testifies in court. And they got approval from the judge that at my age, almost 12 years old, if I am willing to testify, that would possibly give a chance for my father to win. So I agreed. And that was a very crucial turning point in my life because I'm 12 years old at the stand, raising my hand and being questioned by both sides of attorneys, my mom and my dad. That was not easy, but I persevered. I love my mom today. My dad did win custody of me. My mom abandoned me from that point on for probably 40 years of my life. She missed my life entirely because of the hurt behind it. But here's the story. I'm going to speed it up to March of 2020 because we got a lot to talk about here. I'm speeding up the story to March of 2020, the pandemic. I get a phone call from my 76-year-old mom who is living in a different home, which is a drug home. She doesn't do drugs anymore, but she's lived that lifestyle where she's living in a one-bedroom, rented out efficiency drug home. People are dying in this home of overdose, and she's freaked out because there's a pandemic. I get a call from my mom. I moved her in with us temporarily, learning how to communicate with my mom after all that time. I had to forgive myself for 40 years of anger of my biological mom basically abandoning me and just people in my family furious at what she did. But I look back and had to dig deep to where she came from, being dropped off on that step at the fire station. And here is the hardest part, and I think a lot of us need to recognize we have to forgive ourselves for that anger we carried. And I never heard any I'm sorry from her, but we took care of her during the pandemic, cleaned her up. She looks wonderful today. She's 80 years old. We moved her into a senior apartment facility across town from where we live in our little area because she doesn't have a car. She lives on a very tight budget. And we take her to her doctor appointments. We take her grocery shopping. Her budget's tight, so we help her with her food. Isn't that a story full circle? I mean, I'm not here to toot my horn, but it is so I what's the word I'm looking for? I feel free. Like all that anger built up in me, Keith, for my whole life. I'm getting teary eyed here. My
That's
mom is
okay.
part of my life. She's part of my life again. And I love her. And I lost my dad in 2018. He was my hero. And here I am taking care of my mom. So, people that are listening, don't carry those burdens. You don't know the story of the people that hurt you. You don't know where they came from. You don't really know the whole story. I saw earlier this year on TV a Milwaukee police officer was killed in the line of duty, and he was pretty new on the force. And the mother of the police officer just told everybody, you got to just forgive. Yes, I lost my son, but she said the fella that shot and killed him, he lost his life too, and his mother lost her son. So we got to do better. We have to do better in this world. And I hope my message here, Keith, connects with some of your listeners to let go of the anger, because anger doesn't do us any good. It just doesn't. We got to forgive, and we got to set each other free. So I'll
It doesn't.
pause, yield the mic, and see what you got to say there, dear.
You know, it's interesting what you just said because when I first became a pastor, one of the things I had to deal with most was so many angry people. And it was hard because they're angry Christians. And I think for a pastor, dealing with angry Christians who are sometimes mean is really hard. So I remember talking to an older pastor once, and he said to me words that stick to me to this day. And he said, hurting people hurt people.
Yeah.
And it helped me to look at the people who were causing so much personal pain to me to go back and look at their lives. There was one lady in particular who was just, she was just such a toxic personality in my congregation.
Mm.
And when I found out her story, it didn't make it easier sometimes to things she said to me, but it made me understand her better, which was she lost her daughter um, at a very young age to illness, and she always kind of blamed God for it. And so what she did was she took out that anger because she felt she couldn't tell God that she was angry. So
Mhm.
every one of God's children, she took it out on them. But she really should have just had that moment with God to just say, I'm angry about what happened and what you took from me, and let God bring about healing for her. So I get that. And what you just told me is in terms of your story kind of gives me some background with how you are the champion of resilience. I mean, your entire childhood was about resilience. How does God build that character in you, and how did he do that through your early upbringing? Because it helps you in down the road. He's forming character in us with those difficult moments.
Yeah, right on. And he continues to build that character. I mean, every year, every day.
Right.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's profound. And that's where it's at. But you have to sit back and slow down and get into the word and pray and listen, because sometimes we can be stubborn little humans. And like you
Yes.
said, be mad at God. That's why there's a lot of grit back there in my sign. He heard me pretty much be mad at him, and that, that's the grit and the resilience to get through all the crap that I had to get through. But he taught me grace.
Yes.
And that's why those three words behind me have a lot of meaning to me, because we can be angry. And I was for 40 years, and a lot of it was family equally as mad. So misery loves company, right?
Right.
It's funny how misery loves company, but it's hard to get everyone to love as much as misery attracts misery.
Right.
Isn't that
It's definitely true. And for
right?
those who and for those who are just kind of singing and not hearing and not seeing the words behind you, the three words are God, grit, and grace.
Hmm.
And I'm curious, as you think about God, grit, and grace, how does your faith influence your approach to dealing with the corporate world? Because I'm thinking when you think of corporate world, you don't think of God, grit, and grace.
Hmm.
So how has your faith formulated what you do and the difference you're making in the lives, especially of people of minorities?
Yeah. So in the corporate world, as a woman, um, I worked in. I found myself in the male dominated industry just by default. As you know, my dad could not afford to put me through college, so I didn't have a college education. We just were poor. So he told me, if you want to get promoted and do well, you just got to work hard and give it your all in corporate, which I did in my first job. I was on the job for 18 years. And you would recall, and your listeners would recall, Keith, back in the 90s, do you remember going to work and there were people that were on the job for like 20, 25 years, right? And
Right.
my first job in corporate America, career wise, was 18 years. And a lot of that stems from the baby boomer generation prior, my father, instilling in us employers take care of you. So you need to take care of them and be loyal to them. When you're loyal and you have that loyalty on your resume, that's when you go places. And he was right back then. Employers really had wonderful benefits for us. Remember our health insurance? I think our deductibles were $250 and everything was paid
Right. Yeah.
for. Yeah. I mean, I had a 401k. I remember I would put in 6% of my paycheck, and my employer, that same employer, put another 6% into my 401k. Who does that today?
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
so um but that first job, I worked my way up. I started as a customer service rep, and then I became an assistant manager, and then I wanted to be promoted to a branch manager. And I was told no, and back then they could tell you we don't promote women. And I'm like, okay, but I'm doing the same work as my male peers. Yes, they have a college education, but I'm surpassing them in production and work, that the goals that were set for me. Well, we don't promote women, and you don't have the college education, is all I kept hearing from the white men at the top of the ladder. And I stayed positively persistent. I had some grit. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I spoke to God. Oh, sure. But then I had to have grace. So I had to be positively persistent. And they finally said, "All right, Deb, we'll promote you, but on a probationary basis, 6 months to see how you do the job." Well, you know how I did the job. I'm like, okay, if you think I can't do it, I'm going to show you I can. And I did the job. They promoted me, and I paved the path in that first 18-year job in corporate America for other women to get promoted. The difference is they didn't pay me the same amount as they paid the men. And they were very clear about that because I didn't have a college education as well. And I know that for a fact because my husband of today, um, we're married now for about almost 30 years. He worked there. We both were previously married, so we knew what each other was making. And he has said to me, "I can't believe the road that you've traveled through corporate America, the resistance that they have given you." My male counterparts, my white male peers, my white male supervisors have always pushed back on me, employer after employer. And I noticed along with that, because I'm in the field of credit, fair and equal credit opportunities, I've always been in that field my whole career. And as time surpassed, the white male that were top performers of the loan shops, the banks that I work for, it was evident to me that they would also cherry pick. I say that in a nice way, but it's not nice to the applicant, meaning some, not all, of those top performers, the white men that I worked with on the same teams, would be very vocal in the fact that I only work with applicants that I want to work with. So, therefore, if you were a woman or a person of color, they more than likely may not have called you back because they feel like it's going to waste their time. And I'm saying this as politely as I can, but I witnessed it. And that's why I'm an advocate today for unity and diversity. I left corporate America to do what I'm doing today, which is creating solutions for women and people of color to not have this resistance that is being experienced still today. And I know it's being experienced still. You might remember the PPP loan that SBA offered to small business owners during the pandemic. Today, there is 70 billion, B as in boy, billion fraud losses in PPP, meaning, pretend borrowers applied for these loans to support their small businesses. LLCs were created. You could just create a business and apply for this PPP loan. And during the pandemic, it was such a tsunami of what the heck is going on. And these SBA lenders would approve your loan, and you could get 50 grand, 150 grand if you were a small business owner with no questions asked. And I have spoken to plenty of African American small business owners that tried to get the PPP loan to help support payroll and help support the lack of revenues and sales because of the pandemic, and nobody would call them back. On the West Coast, there was an SBA lender that posted a picture on social media of a brand new Tesla. This was in 2021. He posted it on social media. It was a brand new Tesla. We know what Teslas are, the electric cars, and they're very expensive. Well, he posted a picture of it because he was at the intersection, and it was a stoplight, and the license plate on the Tesla said PPP loan. So the driver was a white man, and he got his money for his business, and he bought himself a Tesla. This is the kind of stuff that is happening right here, right now, and still today. And I'm going to be a voice of reason as much as I can, thanks to wonderful hosts like you that allow me on shows to talk about this. I'm not here to bash people. It's not all, but there's plenty of them that are doing things the wrong way. Corporate bank owners, corporate management, they know what's going on. I worked in these loan shops. I positively, persistently, like I did in the 90s when they wouldn't promote me as a woman, I positively, persistently would bring to the attention to HR that things are not right and we need to fix this. I didn't go in bashing because that's not what I do. I go in trying to create unity and diversity and correct what we humans are doing wrong. What did that do? What did that do, Keith? It put a target on my back twice where I get pushed out. How are we going to correct this? We're going to be voices of reason right here, right now. And one day, I would love to get on 2020 or some show. Now that the corporate chains are off of me, I can speak freely. Awareness is right here, right now. And this has been going on for as long as I've been a corporate employee. And now that I'm a small business owner, I'm doing all I can to help women and all minorities have equal opportunity at acquiring small businesses that are owned by baby boomers. And the cherry picking has got to stop. I have an African American couple that live in Arizona. They put in a full offer on a baby boomer owned business, and the business broker has his own personal biases and he won't respond to them. And I've seen this time and time again. It is pathetic. It
Wow.
is absolutely pathetic. I could tell you more stories, but I don't want to come across negative. We have got to do something, and I hope people, decision makers, politicians are listening to your podcast. As you mentioned, you were able to bring on some mayors to your show. I want them to hear what I'm saying, because no matter how I try to help in corporate to raise awareness, to correct unity and diversity and equal and fair credit opportunity for everybody, we're missing the boat. So I'll yield the mic because I could just go on.
No,
Thank
this is
you.
this is very helpful.
Mhm.
For those who are listening, especially those who are minorities trying to get into the small business world, what advice do you have in terms of getting around the roadblocks you have experienced?
Mm. Yeah, the roadblocks, I know what they are. They don't get, people don't call them back. In business lending, all banks have different credit policies. You're going to get more of the same when you call banks because there's so many SBA lenders and most of them are men. They want a certain loan size because why waste my time on $350,000 when I can do a loan for $1 million? They'll flat out tell an applicant, I don't do loan sizes that small. What good does that do the small business minority applicant? Some businesses, just like real estate, might not be worth as much as they are in some other areas. That's the problem. We need to lift up the other areas that need help. The only way that we're going to get around this, Keith, is by the leaders in these communities raising awareness to the leaders of SBA that we need to do something. And I believe what we need to do is raise awareness where we have stimulus programs that are robust for women and all minorities, because the average applicant that acquires established money making businesses or obtains an SBA loan is a white male, the one in corporate that's constantly climbing up the ladder while the rest of us are sitting idle or getting pushed down the ladder. So it's like more of the same. We have to do something. So how do we get around it? Raise your voice. Reach out to the president of the bank. Just be bold. Be positively persistent. We're not bashing, we're creating awareness. Something has got to change. And I'm going to help all I can and leave a legacy behind one day that people that are coming up, women and minorities, they're going to have fair and equal treatment, because it's not happening today.
Guest on my show who's working with employee-owned businesses. He said that in America, it's the one thing that Democrats and Republicans actually both agree on. That instead of selling you just talked about the baby boomer selling his business to on open market. He says there's a way for those people, those owners, to actually let their employees buy the business. They can actually get out of it sooner. And that's one way to create generational wealth. So I like what you're saying too, because he gave another option. It's like, it's actually, that's one that the government actually sponsors and believes in.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that is an option for people listening to this as well. If you are working in a place where the owner is about to sell,
Yeah.
examine the employee-owned business option. I have a podcast on that as well to tie these two together. But that's another way to kind of say, how can we create generational wealth in those communities you're talking about, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe get around the banks, because it's not going on open market, but you're selling it at full value to your employees.
That's right. And those are the best applicants for bank financing backed by the SBA. Those key employees that are they already know the business. They're already operating it. Um,
Right.
those are the people we want to take over and ask questions if you are one of those key employees. Um, you'd be surprised. A lot of these baby boomers, they would rather not put it on the open market and transfer the legacy of the business to you, the hardworking employee. Yeah, I like that, Keith. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, we're always just trying to find ways to help people
Mm-hmm.
through this podcast to live the American dream.
Yeah.
And we talk about diversity. It's funny because that word has become what was once was a positive word has now
Mm-hmm.
has negative connotations, because
Mm-hmm.
people don't hear that as, how do we create opportunities for people who are being abused by the system or being ignored by the
Yeah.
system. They hear that as, how do we maybe disproportionately advance one group versus another group. And it's not really about that, but there are, like you just mentioned, there are practices in our system that leave the minority and women out of the opportunities for success. And so how do we deal with that and realize that those things really are happening?
The monitoring of the bank owners and their management, it all starts at the top. And sadly, just based on my experience, numbers mean more to them than people. It's a given. If we were in the 1990s, I feel like the people meant more than the numbers. And remember, we were talking earlier just how it really changed over the decades. And I think we're just at the top where it's just exploding, and the monitoring is not happening. I would love to see the SBA audit harder on the front line as far as what really is happening. Because the banks will tell you, oh, we got those written regulations in place. We're following them. We have, efficiencies and systems where boxes are checked in the application system. All the questions ask about race and who you are as far as the applicant. they know what they're doing to make it appear that they're being fair and equal with all applicants, but are they really? And I believe we were heading in the right direction shortly after the pandemic, because the SBA was talking about um, allowing smaller loans to be applied directly online with the SBA, which would help women and the minority population. Because let's face it, many of us don't have as much income as a lot of the white men managers of corporate America or owners, because they earned the higher income. Remember Deb, when she was promoted, she didn't get the same income as her white male counterparts. Well, how could have I saved money for down payment to buy a house? How could have I saved money based on my income being less than the white men to purchase finance a business? I wasn't allowed that opportunity my because of my gender. Many weren't allowed that opportunity because of their skin color. So that's why today the average applicant is the white man, because he had all those benefits that we did not. So SBA was going to open up a system for small loans to apply online. And that's more our area, because we don't have as much money as the white men do, because we weren't given the salary increases. And then the PPP loan fraud came into place. So they're busy trying to figure that out. And I want to share with you 70 billion, as in boy, PPP loan fraud wasn't just the borrowers that were the troublemakers of this whole fraud. They were part of it, but somebody was borrowing the money to these fraud
Right.
borrowers. Somebody was borrowing the money that worked at a bank. So we got problems. So maybe once we clean things up, Lord knows when that will be, we'll get better. But until then, I'm going to be a voice of reason.
Well, Deb, I appreciate you, first of all, raising the red flag of awareness of this, because I think most of us don't understand it, or if you're not inside of it, you don't know how the system works.
Mhm.
So I appreciate you coming and giving us that insight. I do have a question. I love to ask my guests this question, because I could talk to you for hours, but
Yeah.
I appreciate what you bring, and I appreciate the passion you bring it with. My question for you is, what do you want your legacy to be?
Mm, I know what that legacy is. And God called me to it back in 2018 when I established my business, getting ready to one day exit corporate. Um, and that would be my message to anybody that wants to exit corporate: get your plan B in place. I want to leave a legacy behind, because God called me to support women and people of color and all minorities to share in the wealth transfer of baby boomers today that are passing on their small businesses looking for the next owner. I want to be the one answering the phone, talking to the women and the minorities to help them with the opportunities to purchase finance these profitable businesses. I want corporate America to be cleaned up, being fair and equal, and really shining their light with diversity in management, with women and minorities, leveling the playing field. And my legacy is that when I'm gone, that my daughters, my granddaughters, all the people of color, the minority population, I want to be able to look back and see, I close my eyes, that it's all diverse. Small business ownership is diverse, and corporate America is diverse. We got to bring back, like you said, the goodness of diversity versus it seems like it's turned into a bad word today. It's a good
Exactly.
word. That's my legacy.
Love that. So for those who like what you have to say, and it's like, I want to connect with Deb and learn more about what she's doing and how I can learn from her, where can they connect with you, and how can they find you on social media?
Yes. Um, my website is my name, debcurtis.com. There's a section where you can contact me there. And then if you want to have fun and learn a little bit more about purchase financing a business, LinkedIn is my go-to for a lot of educating. Of course, I am on all social channels, but if you go to my website, all those icons, oh my God, they just added another social media channel called Threads. I'm like, can we have any more, please? But you'll find me on the website, all those social channels. Can we just combine them into one, Keith? That wouldn't that be nice?
I don't know. There's too much control then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Deb, thanks so much for this conversation and blessings on what you do. And I pray that that vision for you helping people who are on the outside looking to get into corporate America and to create that, to me, entrepreneurs and business people offer something that we don't always understand. That
Mm,
is, God places on sometimes their heart something unique or service or a product that they're passionate about, that they've been gifted for, and they just need an opportunity to give that gift to the world. And sometimes the corporate world stands in the way of God's giftedness and God gifted people sharing those resources with other people. So I'm glad
mm.
you're standing and fighting in the gap for those who have that vision, that gift from God to share with the world.
That was a beautiful ending to this show. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Deb.